Kansas State looked terrible against Indiana. Way too many boneheaded mistakes that need to get addressed right away.
You are Locked On Kansas State, your daily podcast on the Kansas State Wildcats, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, welcome on into Locked On Kansas State, your daily Kansas State Wildcats podcast. I'm your host, Christian Rauh, and thank you so much for making Locked On Kansas State your first listen every single day. Now part of the #1 sports podcast network, the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We're diving into Kansas State losing on the road at Assembly Hall, 86-69. It was a rough game. Let's just keep it straight. It was not a good game for Kansas State. We're going to dive into that. Jerome Tang had some comments after the game as well. And then where do we go from here? Because I do think this team still has the ability to be a tournament team if they make some big adjustments. Before we dive into that, though, today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app and create an account. Use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Indiana taking care of business 86-69, and they couldn't cover the spread against Big 12 teams heading into this one. Kansas State was 5-2 against the spread over the last couple seasons, and it just didn't get done this time. They were an 8.5-point dog, and they wind up losing this one by 17. The main issue was turnovers. That was the main issue here. Obviously not the greatest of shooting nights. They only shot 42% from the field and 40% from three, which that's not bad. They just didn't get enough threes up. We'll talk about that in a second. But shooting 42% from the field, Indiana shooting 47% from the field, it just wasn't good enough for Kansas State. But the biggest takeaway here was the turnovers. And there was just way too many in this basketball game for Kansas State. 19 turnovers, 13 of them in the first half. And you can't win basketball games against potentially D2 teams with 19 turnovers, let alone a top 25 team like Indiana on the road in Assembly Hall, which is one of the coolest atmospheres in college basketball. And Darren DeVries, former head coach of West Virginia, now the head coach of Indiana, is starting to build that back up again. And Indiana's having a really fun college season with their football team being one of the best in the country, obviously going to make the college football playoffs, and Indiana being ranked and moving to 6-0 on the season, while Kansas State moves to 5-2 on the year. The biggest thing about the turnovers wasn't just, turning the ball over. Obviously that happens and you'll get that over, multiple times. It'll happen throughout the games, but they were live turnovers. And that's something that Jerome Tang mentioned. And we'll talk more about that in a minute. But with those live turnovers, that means that it wasn't the opportunity for the defense to get set and actually become a defense. There's already issues with this defense this year. That's always been the biggest thing heading into the year, is how good can this defense be? Jerome Tang is always known for his defenses. How good can a defense be this year? Well, if they don't have the opportunity to actually play defense and they have to just be chasing down the ball, well, you have your answer right there. They're going to lose the basketball game by 17 points on the road against an Indiana team. Heading into this one, before you started off, Kansas State was seen, the new bracketology on ESPN dropped, and they were seen as a team that was going to be seen as a first four out, basically a bubble team that just misses the NCAA tournament. To put that in perspective, Nebraska was seen as one of the first teams in, one of the last teams in, I should say, a team that you just lost to a few days ago. Indiana is sitting pretty as a 7 seed after the win against Kansas State. Can Kansas State find a way to bounce back? Yeah, I think they absolutely can. They got a couple more non-conference games that should challenge them before they get ready to take on BYU in the Big 12 opener. The Big 12 is going to be nasty, and this was probably their first true taste of what they're going to see in Big 12 play, taking on Indiana, taking down Kansas State. And it just didn't work the way that you'd hoped. If this was a game, maybe a month later, this could be different. Kansas State's still looking for their identity, especially on the defensive side. And what we've noticed is when they don't shoot great, that they can't back up and take care of business and maybe keep this one close because they're still struggling on the defensive side. If you can limit this one to less than 19 turnovers, then I think you have a better shot of winning this one, of course. Indiana didn't play great in the turnover department either, and they still won by 17. They had 17 turnovers. They only lost the turnover margin by 2, if you want to be really nitpicking with this one. But when you think you're playing a better team, and in this case, Indiana is at the moment, we can't really change that fact. You can't give them any reason or any doubt. And in this case, having 19 turnovers, it just wasn't working any shape or form. I've gone off and said, I think if PJ Hagerty finds a way to make less than 5 turnovers a game, then you have a good chance of winning this one. Well, he had 6. So that trend continues here. I know it's very close to that 5 thing, but that trend continues for PJ Hagerty. It's been a big struggle for PJ Hagerty driving the lane where they don't call enough fouls on him. He drove the lane multiple times and he struggled on getting the ball up. He's only 7 for 17 from the field. He only had 16 points in this one, but only made it to the free throw line for 3 attempts. So that's something that he's going to have to figure out and try to make adjustments himself to get himself back to the line multiple times, because that's something that works with his game. He wants to drive the lanes. He wants to draw the fouls. At the beginning of the season, he was averaging 8 fouls against heading into this one against defenders. And that's something that is a huge game factor, a huge game changer, not only just how explosive he is on the court, but making the head coaches of other teams have to make decisions and subbing out and bringing in players that they don't want to have on for those minutes. You didn't get that against this Indiana squad. PJ Hagerty actually had 4 fouls himself. He was playing in foul trouble towards the end of the basketball game, and there was a lot of foul issues in this one. Elias Rapique had 4 fouls, although I did think he played a much better game in this one. We're starting to see a little bit more from him. Kamari McGriff had 2 fouls early in this one, and he had to sit out most of the first half. He wound up only playing 10 minutes in this game, and I think that was a huge impact right off the bat. And you saw other big foul issues, like Moby had 4 fouls. He played 15 minutes in this game and couldn't get anything going. You had some rough shots. Abdi Bashir Jr. was shut down from this game. He only shot 1 for 2 from behind the arc. He just couldn't get anything going in his 14 minutes. He wound up not playing much because he just couldn't get anything rolling with the basketball. And then David Castillo, of course, came in and had his most minutes off the bench, something we've seen all season long so far. But again, he couldn't really step up. He only had 7 points in his outing, 2 for 9 from the field, 1 for 5 from three-point land, and he got 2 from the charity strike. A lot of bad things to take from this game. There's not really much good, if I'm being completely honest with you, in this basketball game, other than maybe you got it out of your system. Maybe this was the first game of the year on the road, a true road test, and now you can kind of say that's what it feels like to be on the road in a tested environment, and we didn't capitalize. We didn't live up to the moment. We didn't meet expectations. And hopefully that is what they can roll with Jerome Tang and Matthew Driscoll and some of these other assistant coaches having that type of experience. I'm sure that's how they're going to attempt this and how they're going to try and push this forward in the way they practice. But 19 total turnovers is the main issue here. There's no doubt about that. It's the main issue. They were great from the free throw line when they got there, 87%, 13 for 15 from the line. 3-pointers, they were 40% from 3. 8 for 20 from three-point land. I'd like to see them shoot a lot more of those threes if they're going to be around 40%. Indiana shot 33 attempts and they made 2 extra 3-point shots on that. If Kansas State threw up 30 shots the way that they were shooting that, this game might be a little closer, maybe even change the entire landscape of this basketball game, even with those turnovers. So definitely some offensive improvements that need to happen. Definitely some major fundamental issues that need to happen on those turnovers, because a lot of them were like travels. They were boneheaded moves by Kansas State, just not living up to the expectations of playing in Assembly Hall, and something that needed to happen very early. The first 4 minutes was dreadful in this one. They were down at one point, I believe, 20-5. I think I saw at one point. It was rough. They did not have a lead this entire game, and they didn't deserve it. They didn't play good basketball, and they need to find a way to get better. Jerome Tang kind of said the same things that I'm going at right now, but in a way that you'd be happy to hear from a head coach of a college basketball team. We'll talk about that next right here on Locked On Kansas State. But first, the NBA is back, and there's no better place to get in on the action than with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Even if you missed the start of the game or want to ride that hot hand, well, FanDuel has live bets on everything from who will score next to fourth quarter comebacks. Plus, you can even combine your live bets into that good old SGP, same game parlay, for a shot at a bigger payout. It keeps every game exciting, especially when your team's making that late push. And unfortunately, that late push didn't happen for Kansas State. As I mentioned, heading into this one, they were 5-2 against the spread against Big Ten opponents. Well, that moves to 5-3 now because they could not cover the 8.5 points against Indiana. It was a pretty rough outing for Kansas State. Well, if you think that you want to go and make it better and maybe change your luck if you did bet against the spread for Kansas State, well, right now, FanDuel's giving new customers $300 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. So head to FanDuel.com, sign up, and play your game with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Kansas State falling to Indiana, 86-69. It's their worst loss of the season. You know, they lost it in Nebraska as well, but this is their worst loss of the season in the eyes of performance. In the eyes of the committee, I don't think it's going to hurt them that much. I think it's going to wind up turning into a quad one loss for Kansas State because this is a very good basketball team in Indiana. I think this is a tournament team. I think so far, both the losses, Nebraska's on pace to be a tournament team as well. So you're still in good graces of the committee, in my opinion. I think you can continue to play your game and keep moving forward. You have a couple easier games on the schedule in non-conference. The next few games around, you do have at least one tougher matchup later on before you finish your non-conference schedule. There's still 4 left on the slate. But next up is Mississippi Valley State, and that is a game that should be very easy. I'm sorry. The next game is Bowling Green. I'm looking at the wrong. You have Bowling Green, you have Seton Hall, then Mississippi Valley State. I don't know why that didn't show up until I just clicked this button. I apologize for that. Bowling Green's next on the schedule. Marcus Johnson came from there. We haven't seen Marcus Johnson play for Kansas State yet, but that's where he transferred from. Then Seton Hall, who has played pretty good. We have seen Seton Hall look pretty good so far this season. And then you play Mississippi Valley State, who, according to Ken Pom, is the worst team in the country. So something that, of course, has to get fixed. Seton Hall just lost the other night to USC. They beat North Carolina State. They are 6-1 at the moment. This is going to be another true test for Kansas State, but this one's back in Manhattan, so hopefully that can help. But it looks like Seton Hall is going to challenge for maybe being one of the top teams in the Big East this season. So you got a couple tough slates to start off your December, and then you take on Creighton, who hasn't had the best season so far. I thought this might have been a tougher game, but who knows? They might figure it out. They've had They've had troubles shooting. They've had troubles rebounding the basketball, something that Kansas State had troubles with on last night against Indiana. And rebounding was an issue again. And that's been an issue for Kansas State for, as long as I can remember. It might have been an issue since Jerome Tang's taken over as head coach, at least over the last 2 seasons for sure. And they lose the rebounding battle by 7 in this one, 35-28. Out rebounded in the offensive side, 11-8. And then on the defensive side, 24-20. And you just, that's a major issue. If you lose the rebounding battle and you lose the turnover battle, if you don't shoot as well as the other team, every single statistical category is in favor of Indiana. And that's exactly what Jerome Tang was kind of saying in his post-game speech the other night against Indiana. He basically apologized in his post-game radio show, basically just apologized to exactly all the fans. He wanted to say that this was just not a good game for Kansas State. He basically just said how unfortunate it was that fans traveled to this one. He was very straightforward. He said, quote, "I apologize to our fans, man, that they had to watch that. It starts with me. I didn't do a very good job at preparing the guys for this, and I take the blame for that." One, on both sides of it, you could say, yeah, you're right, Jerome Tang. It was a bad game. It was terrible. What happened? But on the flip side, it's almost refreshing that we have a coach like Jerome Tang who is willing to step up and take the blame and take accountability for a team who has NCAA tournament aspirations and I think expectations without question, and say, yeah, this wasn't good enough for our squad. We have an All-American on our team. We have some great international talent. We have a MAC player of the year, a defensive player of the year on our squad. We have the talent to win in Assembly Hall against Indiana, but instead we showed up flat. We traveled the basketball way too many times. We had some boneheaded decisions. We had 19 turnovers, and you just can't win basketball in a game against a good basketball team when you do that. So I actually applaud Jerome Tang for stepping forward and taking full accountability. Now, it might have been the easiest thing he could have done because there's no going around this one and saying, pointing fingers at anybody else, because this is just a bad game overall for Kansas State in every aspect of it. But I do applaud him 100% for what he did in this one. When you look at what needs to improve, I mean, they kept asking him questions in the scrum, in the post game, and he kept going back to the turnovers. And we've mentioned that multiple times on this show as well. Everything gets better if you don't turn over the basketball. And if you don't have 13 turnovers in the first half, you're probably not down by 12 into the locker room. You're probably making that a lot closer. Adjustments are probably a lot easier, and you can play more of your game for PJ Hagerty, through Nate Johnson, through maybe Abdi Bashir gets a little hotter, who knows, because you're able to move the basketball more, you're able to have more possessions, and that's something that needs to improve on. I mean, each team shot 57 attempts from the field. Indiana only had 3 more shots, but they had way more from the free throw line. And if PJ Hagerty and some of these other players, Nate Johnson, et cetera, had more opportunities to do so, instead of getting 19 turnovers, meaning 19 turnovers are not on your offensive side, then you could have won this game and get to the free throw line and do some other things. So I definitely think that turnovers are where that all changes. And I kind of mentioned this earlier, but same on the defensive side. The defensive side is a lot better if you're not playing live turnovers, something that Jerome Tang said, where most of those were turnovers that happened in real time. They were live, meaning that it happened in transition, and there's no way to set up your defense. He was asked about how you improve the defense, and he kind of gave a little bit of pushback. And he said, I think we have a good defense when we are set up to play defense. If you have these turnovers where we have to basically chase down the ball, no one can play good defense. And he's right. He's 100% right. I don't know if I completely agree with him saying that they play great defense when they're set up. I think it's getting improved. I think the defense has shown some improvement over the beginning of the season, but I don't know if I want to put it in the great category yet. But I completely agree with him to the fact that if you don't have 19 turnovers, live turnovers, and you can play better defense, then this game is a lot closer. And who knows, maybe you do get that upset in Assembly Hall on Tuesday night. Overall, this is a game that needs to be taken as a gut check. And it's not like it's going to slow down with that game in Seton Hall coming up on the 6th. And of course, the game against Bowling Green on December 1st on Monday. There's a lot of really good games coming up for Kansas State. They can't let this one put them down, because that is something that happened last season. If you remember, in non-conference play, that is something that really impacted them. It really messed with them on the season. They finished the year 16-17, and they were 500 in the conference, basically 9-11. Now there's going to be less conference games in here. These non-conference games mean so much more to Kansas State's schedule. They mean so much more. So you got to find a way to hopefully make this your last loss of non-conference. I think you might be able to afford one more, maybe, if that's a Seton Hall or a Creighton, if you are thinking that those teams are going to be a bubble team in the tournament. Maybe Seton Hall's a very good team. Who knows? So far, they look really good. I think you might be able to afford one more, but I wouldn't risk it. I would not risk it. The Big 12 is a gauntlet this year. It's better than last year. I think the Big 12 is better than last year, to the point to where I think that if you told me 10 teams from the Big 12 make the tournament, that would not shock me. And the 10th team being maybe Kansas State. Like, that's how good I think the Big 12 conference is this season. And you got to find a way to capitalize a non-conference. So if you do fall flat a couple times in Big 12 play, you are still in contention on making the NCAA tournament. There's still a lot of things to be excited about, though, from the team as a whole. Maybe not for this game, but for the team as a whole this season. One of them is David Castillo. And I think you got to give more minutes to some of these other international players. We'll talk about this next to finish up this show right here on Locked On Kansas State. But first, college football is back. It's almost over, but it's still back. I couldn't be more excited. The tailgates, the rivalries, the energy in the stands. There's nothing like it, but let's be real. Actually getting tickets can feel more like a battle than the game itself, with endless queues, hidden fees, and prices jumping at checkout. If you're looking to get tickets for the last game of the season against Colorado on Saturday in Manhattan, what a perfect time to use Game Time. It's the app that gives advantage back to the fans. It's the easiest way to score last minute tickets at the best prices with no surprise fees. What you see is what you pay. I've pulled up Game Time in the past, and I'm talking about tickets for these college football games as low as $25. It is a great deal. You definitely got to check it out, especially if you're thinking about getting to the last game on Saturday. And if you want to save even more and take the guesswork out of buying college football tickets with Game Time, download that Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege, all one word, for $20 off your first purchase. Terms do apply, but again, that's promo code LOCKEDONCollege, all one word, for $20 off. Swipe, tap, ticket, go. Download Game Time today. How are you feeling after the loss for Kansas State to Indiana? I mean, I'm feeling a little bit not great. I'm not feeling great because it was a game that I was hoping that we could see really the benchmark of this team. If they would have beat this Indiana team, we could have came on here and saying, I think it's time that maybe you consider ranking Kansas State in the top 25 because you would have knocked out a top 25 team, although they're right at 25. I think that moves up for Indiana a little bit because Kansas State's still seen pretty decent in the eyes of Ken Pom, a top 50 team. And I think that means great things. Kansas State's offense still looks great overall. It's just when they have bad shooting nights, it's not the best thing. David Castillo, I like that he got almost 30 minutes in this game, but his shooting wasn't electric as well. I think you still got to keep feeding him the bone, though. I think you got to keep getting him into consideration. I love that he's coming off the bench. I think that's a great position for him, and I want him to continue to do so. What I don't like in this one is that Andre Kostic only played 10 minutes. He only had 2 points. He only shot 2 attempts. But I think you got to find a way to get him involved a little bit more. I think he could turn into one of your most explosive players coming off the bench, just like David Castillo by the time Big 12 play rolls around, if you utilized his minutes properly over these next few games. If you give him maybe 20 minutes against Bowling Green to show what he's got, maybe he gets the opportunity to shine against Seton Hall. And obviously, I think that there's a real big opportunity for multiple players to play against Mississippi Valley State. I think Taj Manning might play 30 minutes in that game. Honestly, that one should be a blowout. If it's not, then we got some problems to talk about on this podcast. But I want to see Andre Kostic get more minutes. I think he deserves to get more time. And obviously, when you look at this roster and you see there's a ton of players that deserve minutes. I mean, McGriff only had 10 minutes here. He's been playing really well. Foul trouble is what sat him out. And that's probably one of the biggest reasons why we saw CJ Jones and Moby play almost 20 minutes apiece. CJ Jones played 23 minutes. Moby played 15 minutes. Now, CJ Jones had probably his best game in a Kansas State uniform against Indiana at Assembly Hall, putting down 15 points. He was 5 for 10 from the field, 3 for 4 for 3-pointer land. He plays pretty good defense, and that's something that you were hoping that he could maybe be a role player off the bench, and he's had to take a bigger role because some of these other players haven't been able to do so over the last couple games. But I'd like to see Andre Kostic make that next step forward. Hopefully that can change in practice. Hopefully he gives the coaching staff a little bit more of a confidence boost to get him in for more than 10 minutes. Because right now, I don't like the fact that he is getting just 10 minutes right now per game, at least 10 minutes against Indiana. Overall, looking at his stats on the season so far, he's averaging 4.3 points per season on the season so far, 2 rebounds and 1 assist. He's shooting 35% from the field, and he is averaging just over 10 minutes per game, 10.4 in the 7 games played so far this year. His most minutes played is 16 against Mississippi State. I'd like to see that. He played 17 in the first game of the season against UNCG. I'd like to see that back up to about 16 minutes against Bowling Green. I think we get him for the next couple non-conference games. If you can get him closer to the 16, 17 minute mark, I think that would do wonders for when you are building depth in Big 12 play. If you disagree with me, let me know in the comments. But I think Andre Kostic has the the ability to be a weapon off the bench for Kansas State. Can come in and take over if Abdi Bashir's having a bad game, can take over for Nate Johnson if he needs a break. You can rotate more with him and David Castillo, and I think he can play in a couple different positions as well. I think he's great off the wing. I think he could be an even better player off the wing, and I think he has the opportunity to facilitate if you give him the opportunity to do so as well. That's where my mind goes when you're looking at a certain spotlight of a player, something that I wish I would have been able to see more in this Indiana game. Nothing was really working out for this team, though, so I'm not going to really take any discredit away from this coaching staff. They'll be the first to tell you that they didn't prepare well for this. When they're getting ready for practice this week, obviously they're going to have the holidays off and they're going to prepare for Bowling Green on Monday. I'd like to see Kostic get closer to 15, 16, maybe even closer to 20 minutes in that matchup. Let me know what you think. We got a lot more to cover on this one as well. On the flip side, we got college football to talk about with Kansas State finishing up their regular season against Colorado. I had a good conversation with Kevin Borba on Locked On Buffs. We have a crossover coming out for you on a Thursday. And of course, even though it's Thanksgiving, we're still here. And on Friday, I'll give you my predictions for the game and a fun spotlight about why I think Avery Johnson is going to have a breakout game to make sure Kansas State gets bowl eligible. But until then, please like the video, please subscribe. And while you are at the turkey table this Thanksgiving, ask your friends and family if they've heard about Locked On Kansas State, because we're bringing you Wildcat coverage like nobody else. Tell a friend, share it, and have them subscribe as well. We'll see you back here next time, right here on Locked On Kansas State.